The transport ship's doors opened with a hiss, and one stepped onto the platform of the Galactic Defense Academy. Her boots touched the polished metal floor, and she had to stop herself from stumbling backward. The station was massive, stretching out in every direction like a small city floating in space. Through the transparent dome above, she could see 3 different colored suns casting strange shadows across everything. Around her, other cadets moved in groups. They were nothing like the people back home on Earth's Soul Colony. A creature with blue scales and 4 arms walked past, chatting with something that looked like it was made entirely of crystal. Behind them, a cadet who seemed to be 7 feet tall lumbered by, its footsteps shaking the floor slightly. One tightened her grip on her duffel bag and tried not to stare. She was one of 3 humans in this year's class, 3 out of 200 cadets. The Academy's representative had made that very clear during recruitment. "You'll be pioneers," they had said, "representatives of your species." Right now, one just felt small. Inside her bag, wrapped in an old cloth, was her grandfather's rifle. It was a kinetic weapon from the old Earth Wars, before humanity joined the galactic community. The rifle used actual bullets, fired by explosive powder. No energy cells, no plasma charges, just metal and chemistry. Her grandfather had taught her to shoot with it every summer at the mountain range outside the colony. He had been a soldier once, back when Earth still fought its own wars. "Iron sights and steady hands," he always said. "Technology fails, but the body remembers." The orientation hall was enormous. One found a seat near the back and watched as the other cadets filed in. They talked in dozens of languages, the universal translators in everyone's ears turning the sounds into something understandable. The noise was overwhelming. A tall figure walked onto the stage at the front. It was hard to tell what species the instructor belonged to because most of its body had been replaced with mechanical parts. One eye glowed blue, the other was covered by a targeting lens. When it spoke, its voice was deep and carried easily through the hall. "Welcome to the Galactic Defense Academy," it said. "I am Instructor Vane. You are here because you are the best your worlds have to offer, but being the best at home means nothing here. You all start as equals, as nothing. What you become depends entirely on how well you adapt." The screens behind Vane lit up, showing images of weapons one had never seen before. Energy rifles that looked like they belonged in a dream. Plasma cannons that could level buildings. Targeting systems that connected directly to the user's brain. "Modern warfare is fought with modern tools," Vane continued. "You will learn to use neural targeting implants, advanced energy weapons, and combat systems that respond to thought faster than any trigger finger. The old ways are dead. This is the new standard." One felt something cold settle in her stomach. She glanced down at her bag, thinking of the rifle inside. After orientation, all the cadets were directed to the medical wing. One followed the crowd, staying close to the walls. Her bunkmate assignment was with a named, one of the four-armed cadets she had seen earlier. Seemed friendly enough, offering a smile with too many teeth and helping one find their assigned room. The medical wing was bright and sterile. A doctor with tentacles instead of arms gestured for one to sit in a specialized chair. On the tray beside it sat a small device that looked like a metal insect. "This is your neural targeting implant," the doctor explained, its voice patient. "It will interface with your visual cortex and motor control centers. When you aim a weapon, the implant calculates trajectory, wind resistance, target movement, everything. Your accuracy will increase by approximately 400%. One stared at the device. "It goes inside my head." "A minor procedure, 15 minutes, no pain." The doctor's tentacles moved in what might have been a reassuring gesture. "Every combat-qualified species uses them. Humans are fully compatible." She thought about her grandfather's lessons. The way he taught her to feel the weight of the rifle, to control her breathing, to become part of the weapon rather than just holding it. Would the implant change that? Would it make shooting feel like operating a machine instead of an extension of herself? "Can I think about it?" one asked. The doctor's expression was unreadable. "Of course, but training begins tomorrow. Without the implant, you'll be at a significant disadvantage." That night, one lay in her bunk while snored softly above her. The room was dark except for the glow of the three suns through the window. She pulled the rifle out of her bag and unwrapped it carefully. The metal was worn smooth in places from years of use. Her grandfather's initials were carved into the stock. She ran her fingers along the barrel, remembering the last time they had gone shooting together. He was old by then, his hands shaking slightly, but he could still hit a target at 500 meters. "The rifle doesn't think for you," he had said. "You have to think for it. That's what makes you strong." One wrapped the rifle back up and slid it under her bunk. Tomorrow she would get the implant. She had to. This was the galactic standard, the way everyone fought now. Her grandfather's methods were from a different time, a different world. But as she closed her eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to lose something important. Something that made her human in a way these other species would never understand. The Academy's lights dimmed further, entering night cycle. Outside, ships moved silently through space, carrying supplies and personnel to this floating fortress of learning. Somewhere in the complex, instructors prepared tomorrow's lessons. Somewhere, weapons were being cleaned and maintained. Somewhere, the future of galactic defense was being shaped. One pulled her blanket and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would be her first real day of training. Tomorrow, she would learn to shoot the new way, the modern way. She told herself it would be fine, that her grandfather would understand. But deep down, she wasn't sure she believed it. The rifle lay under her bunk in the darkness, a relic from Earth's past. In the morning, one would join the future. She would become like all the other cadets, connected to their weapons through circuits and code. The old ways would fade. Or so she thought. 4 weeks into training, one stood in the firing range with a pulse rifle in her hands. The weapon hummed with barely contained energy, its weight distributed perfectly for maximum comfort. Inside her head, the neural implant fed her constant information. Distance to target, 73 meters. Wind speed, negligible. Atmospheric pressure, optimal. Probability of hit, 97%. She pulled the trigger. The pulse of blue energy shot forward and struck the target 2 centimeters left of center. Adequate, the range computer announced in its flat voice. Cadet Park score, 81 out of 100. Around her, other cadets were finishing their rounds. The scoreboard updated constantly on the wall. A cadet with skin and razor-sharp ridges along his skull scored 98, scored 96. Even the cadets one had never spoken to were scoring in the high 80s and 90s. One looked down at her rifle. The neural implant felt strange, like having someone whisper calculations in her ear while she was trying to concentrate. Every time she aimed, the numbers appeared in her vision, floating over the target. The implant wanted her to adjust her stance by 0.3 degrees. It suggested she exhale exactly 1.7 seconds before firing. It was precise, calculated, and completely alien to everything her grandfather had taught her. Back home, shooting had been about feeling, about knowing when the moment was right. Her grandfather never talked about percentages or calculations. He talked about becoming still, about letting the world fade away until only you and the target existed. Cadet Park. Instructor Vane's voice made her turn. He stood behind her, his mechanical eye whirring as it focused. Your scores are average. Yes, sir. One didn't know what else to say. The implant is working correctly. Yes, sir. Medical confirmed it this morning. Vane studied her for a long moment. His expression was unreadable behind all the augmented parts. Finally, he nodded. Carry on. That afternoon, one squad participated in a team simulation. 6 cadets, including her, and entered a virtual combat zone projected by the Academy's advanced holographic systems. The scenario was simple. Defend a position against incoming enemies for 10 minutes. One took her assigned position behind a barrier. The neural implant immediately began calculating firing angles and threat priorities. Enemy targets appeared at the far end of the simulation zone, moving toward them in coordinated patterns. She fired, trusting the implant's calculations. Hit. Fired again. Hit. The system was efficient, mechanical. Around her operated with the same precision. It was like watching a computer program run perfectly. Then 3 minutes into the simulation, one's neural implant flickered. Just for 3 seconds, but in combat, 3 seconds was an eternity. Her vision filled with static. The targeting information disappeared. The probability calculations vanished. She was suddenly alone inside her own head, holding a weapon she could barely understand. As she froze. By the time the implant came back online, 2 virtual enemies had breached their position. The simulation ended in failure, red letters spelling "Objective failed" across everyone's vision. "What happened?" demanded, pulling off his helmet. His eyes, both of them black and twice the size of human eyes, fixed on one. Someone's targeting system failed. "It was me," one admitted. "My implant glitched for a few seconds." "A few seconds," his voice rose. "In real combat we'd all be dead. Get your equipment checked, human." Put one of her 4 hands on one's shoulder. It happens sometimes with new implants. The human neural structure is different from most species. You probably just need an adjustment. Her tone was kind, but one heard the condescension underneath. Humans were newer to all this, newer to the galactic community, newer to advanced technology. Of course they would have trouble adjusting. That night in the cafeteria, one sat alone, picking at food she couldn't identify. 2 tables over, she heard talking to a group of other cadets. "Did you see the human in Simulator 7 today?" His voice carried across the room. 3 seconds without her targeting system, and she completely froze. Imagine if humans still used their primitive methods. They'd be shooting blind, probably hit themselves more than the enemy. Laughter followed. Not cruel exactly, but dismissive. The laughter of people who couldn't imagine being that helpless. One pushed her tray away and left the cafeteria. She walked through the academy's corridors without any destination in mind, just needing to move. Eventually, she found herself in a section she hadn't explored before. The halls here were older, the lights dimmer. A sign on the wall read "Historical Training Facilities." Curious, she followed the corridor to a door marked Auxiliary Range 7. The door opened at her touch, revealing a long room filled with dust. This wasn't like the modern firing ranges with their holographic targets and climate control. This was basic, almost primitive. Paper targets hung at the far end. The floor was marked with distance measurements in meters. One looked around to make sure she was alone, then returned to her room. Was out, probably at some study group. One grabbed her grandfather's rifle from under the bunk and carried it back to the auxiliary range. The weight of the rifle in her hands felt right, real. She loaded it with bullets from the small box she'd brought from Earth, feeling the smooth metal casings between her fingers. No neural implant whispered calculations. No targeting computer told her where to aim. Just her, the rifle, and the targets. She raised the weapon, finding the familiar stance her grandfather had taught her. Feet shoulder-width apart, elbows slightly bent, cheek against the stock. Eye aligned with the iron sights, those simple pieces of metal that had guided bullets for centuries before computers existed. Breathe in, breathe out. Wait for the moment between heartbeats when the body is most still. Fire. The crack of the gunshot echoed in the empty range. The bullet struck the target dead center. One fired again. Center. Again. Center. She worked through all 30 rounds in the magazine, each shot placed exactly where she intended. No calculations, no percentages, no probability predictions. Just skill, instinct, and muscle memory that had nothing to do with technology. When she finished, she lowered the rifle and stared at the target. 30 holes, all clustered in the center ring. This was shooting the way it was meant to be. This was what her grandfather had tried to teach her. Interesting. One spun around. Instructor Vane stood in the doorway, his mechanical parts gleaming in the dim light. She had no idea how long he'd been watching. "Sir, I can explain. I wasn't neglecting my regular training, I just—" Vane raised one hand, cutting her off. He walked forward slowly, his eyes on the target rather than on her. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. 30 rounds, kinetic weapon, iron sights. He turned to look at her. 30 hits, all center mass. One didn't know if she was in trouble or not. She stood at attention, waiting. Vane studied her for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the door. Just before he left, he paused. "The neural targeting system is the galactic standard, Cadet Park, but standards change." Then he was gone, leaving one alone with her grandfather's rifle and more questions than answers. 2 days later, the midterm rankings were posted. One had dropped to 163 out of 200 cadets. A formal notice appeared on her data pad. Performance review required. Probationary status enacted. She sat on her bunk, staring at the notice. Tried to be encouraging, but even she seemed worried. "Maybe you should request an implant adjustment," she suggested, "or additional simulator time." One nodded, but she wasn't thinking about the implant or the simulators. She was thinking about the auxiliary range, about the feeling of the rifle in her hands, about her grandfather's words. Technology failed, but the body remembers. She just wished she knew what that was supposed to mean here, in a place where technology was everything. The combat assessment maze stretched out before them like a metallic nightmare. One stood with the other cadets at the entrance, checking her equipment one final time. Pulse rifle, fully charged. Energy shield generator on her belt. neural targeting implant running all diagnostics green. She was as ready as she could be. This assessment counted for 40% of their final combat grade. The maze was filled with moving targets, hostile drones, and adaptive threats that learned from cadet responses. Complete the course efficiently, and your ranking improved. Fail, and you might not graduate at all. Remember, Instructor Vane told the assembled group, this is a combat simulation, but the dangers are real. The drones use non-lethal rounds, but they will hurt. Your shields will protect you, but they can be overwhelmed. Think tactically. Move smart. Trust your training. One entered the maze with the third group. The metal walls rose 3 meters high on either side, creating corridors that twisted and turned in unpredictable patterns. Her neural implant immediately began mapping the space, feeding her a constantly updating 3-dimensional model of her surroundings. She moved forward, rifle ready. The first target appeared around a corner, a holographic enemy that moved like a living being. Her implant calculated the shot. She fired. The target dissolved. The maze computer announced, target eliminated. Time, 0.8 seconds. Efficiency, optimal. One continued deeper into the maze. More targets appeared, some moving, some stationary. She engaged each one according to her training, trusting the implant to guide her shots. It was mechanical, efficient, empty of feeling. But it worked. She was halfway through the course when the entire maze went dark. Not just dark, dead. The lights cut out, plunging everything into blackness. One's neural implant went silent in her head, the constant stream of information suddenly gone. Her pulse rifle, connected to the same power grid, died in her hands. Even her shield generator stopped humming. Emergency lights kicked on, bathing everything in red. But the damage was done. One stood in the middle of the maze, holding a useless weapon, her targeting system blank, her training suddenly worthless. An electromagnetic pulse. She'd studied them in theory class. They could disable all electronic systems in a wide area, turning modern weapons into expensive clubs. It was one of the most feared weapons in modern warfare because it didn't kill. It just made killing impossible for anyone who relied on technology. Around her in the maze, she heard other cadets shouting in confusion. Someone screamed. Metal crashed against metal. The combat drones, she realized, weren't affected. They ran on shielded systems. They were still active, still hunting. One pressed herself against the wall and tried to think. Her implant was dead. Her weapon was dead. But the test was still running. And somewhere in this maze were drones with very real, very painful ammunition. She heard footsteps running toward her position. Burst around the corner, his face twisted in panic. His large black eyes were wide, and he was firing his pulse rifle repeatedly at nothing. Click, click, click. The weapon was completely dead. "It's not working," he shouted. "Why isn't it working?" A drone appeared at the far end of the corridor. It was a floating sphere about the size of a human head, covered in sensors and equipped with a small weapon port. The port aimed at. One grabbed his arm and pulled him around the corner just as the drone fired. The round hit the wall where had been standing, leaving a scorch mark. "We need to move," one said. "Our weapons are down, but the drones aren't." "How do we fight them?" asked. For the first time since one had met him, he looked completely lost. "I can't target without the implant. I don't know how to aim manually." One stared at him. None of them did. They had all trained exclusively with neural targeting systems. Take that away, and they were helpless. She heard more cadets shouting in the distance, heard the sounds of drones firing and people running in panic. Then she saw it. Mounted on the wall was an emergency weapons cache, the kind installed in every training facility for safety purposes. But these weren't modern weapons. The sign above the case read "Historical Combat Equipment," for demonstration purposes only. One smashed the glass with her elbow. Inside were weapons from a dozen different eras and species. And there, among alien devices she didn't recognize, was something beautiful and familiar. A ballistic rifle, similar in design to her grandfather's weapon. Not identical, but close enough. She grabbed it, checked the chamber by touch, found the magazine release, confirmed it was loaded. 20 rounds of actual bullets. No electronics, no computers, no neural link. Just mechanical parts that would work no matter what an EMP did. "What is that?" asked, staring at the weapon like it was a museum piece. "Something that still works," one replied. She moved to the corner and glanced down the corridor. 3 drones were advancing, their sensors sweeping back and forth. In her mind, one heard her grandfather's voice. "Leading a moving target is simple. You don't aim where it is. You aim where it will be." She raised the rifle, finding the iron sights. No implant told her the distance. She estimated it herself. 30 meters, maybe 35. The drones were moving left to right at what looked like 2 meters per second. She would need to lead the shot by about half a meter. Breathe in, breathe out, wait for stillness. Fire. The rifle kicked against her shoulder with satisfying force. The bullet caught the first drone dead center, and it exploded in a shower of sparks and metal. The other 2 drones immediately shifted their attention to her. She worked the rifle's bolt action, chambering another round and fired again. The second drone went down. The third drone was faster, already compensating for her position. It fired, and one dove to the side, feeling the heat of the round pass where her head had been. She rolled, came up on one knee, and fired from an unsupported position. The bullet hit the drone's sensor array and it spiraled into the wall. Silence fell over that section of the maze, was staring at her with something like awe. How did you do that? Without the targeting system, how did you know where to aim? I learned the old way, one said simply. She ejected the magazine, checked her remaining ammunition. 17 rounds. Come on, we need to keep moving. Word spread through the maze quickly. The human knows how to fight in the dark. Cadets started finding their way to her, following the sound of gunfire. Appeared with 2 other cadets, all of them armed with dead weapons and looking terrified. One said, relief flooding her voice, "The drones are everywhere. We can't stop them." "I can," one replied, "but I need you all to stay behind me and watch for threats I might miss." She led them through the maze, engaging drones with methodical precision. Each shot had to count because she had limited ammunition. No spray and pray, no suppressive fire. Every bullet needed to eliminate a threat. Her grandfather had taught her this too. In the old wars, ammunition was precious. You made every shot matter. They encountered another group of cadets pinned down by 4 drones. One took position, controlled her breathing, and eliminated 3 drones with 3 shots. The 4th she hit with her second attempt, the first bullet missing by centimeters. By the time they reached the maze's final objective, one had 11 cadets following her and 4 rounds left in her magazine. The objective was a fortified position that, under normal circumstances, would require coordinated assault with energy weapons and shield penetrators. But circumstances weren't normal. One studied the position, thinking tactically without any computer assistance. She remembered her grandfather talking about old Earth battles, about how soldiers fought before drones and satellites told them where the enemy was. "Oh," she said, "take 3 cadets and make noise on the left flank. Don't engage, just make them think you're attacking from that side." "But we don't have working weapons," protested. "You have voices, use them. Make them think you're a threat." Whilst group shouted and threw debris from the left side, one led the others in a quiet approach from the right. The drones defending the objective shifted their attention toward the noise, their sensors focused on the apparent threat. One used her last 4 rounds to take out the drones one by one while they were distracted. The final drone she had to engage in close combat, using the rifle as a club when her ammunition ran out. The maze computer suddenly came back online. The lights brightened, and everyone's equipment hummed back to life. One's neural implant reactivated, flooding her vision with information she no longer needed. A voice boomed through the maze. "Combat assessment complete. All cadets report to debriefing." In the debriefing room, the other cadets sat in stunned silence as the instructors reviewed the results. Out of 200 cadets, Only 15 had completed the objective after the EMP. 12 of those 15 had been part of one's group. Finally broke the silence. How did you shoot without the targeting system? The rest of us couldn't even aim. One looked at him, then at all the other cadets staring at her with confusion and something that might have been fear or respect. She thought about how to explain something that seemed so obvious to her. "I didn't need it," she said finally. "I learned to shoot before I ever got the implant." The room fell silent again. Instructor Vane stood at the front, his mechanical eye fixed on one. "Cadet Park, report to my office immediately after debriefing." One's heart sank. She'd broken the rules, used unauthorized equipment, probably violated a dozen protocols. But as she sat there, surrounded by cadets who had been helpless while she fought, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Some things were more important than rules. Instructor Vane's office was nothing like one expected. She had imagined a sterile military space with regulation furniture and standard-issue decorations. Instead, she walked into what looked like a museum of warfare. The walls were covered with weapons from across the galaxy and throughout history. Ancient blade weapons from Species 1 had never heard of hung next to primitive firearms that looked older than human space travel. Holographic displays showed famous battles, paused mid-action like frozen moments of violence and strategy. In the corner sat what appeared to be an actual ballistic cannon from some forgotten war. Vane sat behind a desk made from what looked like ship armor. His mechanical eye whirred softly as it focused on one. "Sit." She sat, back straight, hands on her knees. She had no idea if she was in trouble or not. Using unauthorized equipment during an assessment was definitely against regulations. But she'd also completed the objective when most others had failed. Vane studied her in silence for what felt like an hour. Finally, he spoke. "You shot old Earth style." It wasn't a question, but one answered anyway. "Yes, sir. My grandfather taught me before I enlisted." "Your grandfather," Vane leaned back in his chair. "Was he military?" "Yes, sir. Infantry during the border conflicts, before Earth joined the galactic community." Vane's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. He stood and walked to one of the weapon displays on the wall. His mechanical fingers traced the outline of an ancient rifle encased in transparent metal. "I fought alongside human soldiers once," Vane said quietly. "This was 40 years ago during the frontier wars in the Outer Rim. Most species don't remember those conflicts. They were small, contained, politically inconvenient, but I was there." He turned to face one. "Do you know what happened in those wars?" "No, sir. They don't teach much Earth military history at the Academy." "They don't teach it because it makes the other species uncomfortable." Vane walked back to his desk but didn't sit. The frontier wars were fought in radiation zones, areas where solar flares and cosmic storms made electronic systems unreliable at best and completely useless at worst. Most galactic military forces couldn't operate there. Their weapons failed, their targeting systems went blind, their communication networks collapsed. He paused, his mechanical eye fixed on some distant memory. But the human soldiers kept fighting. They used kinetic weapons, visual signals, and combat methods that didn't require any technology more advanced than chemical propulsion and metal sights. While everyone else retreated, humans held their ground. One sat very still, listening. I watched a human sergeant take out 12 enemy positions with a rifle not much different from the one you used in the maze today. He had no targeting computer, no neural link, no probability calculations. Just eyes, hands, and training that went back thousands of years. Vane's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Only humans master that method. One felt something tighten in her chest. Sir. Vane sat down and leaned forward, his augmented face intense. Every other species in the galaxy trains from childhood with computational assistance. They have targeting implants installed at age 5, are born with natural electromagnetic sense that functions like a built-in rangefinder. The crystalline species literally process battlefield mathematics as naturally as breathing. He gestured at one. But humans evolved on a world without any of that. You spent hundreds of thousands of years hunting with nothing but thrown rocks and sharp sticks. You developed firearms and used them for centuries before you even left your planet. Your species learned to aim, to track, to predict movement, all without any technological aid. You're the only species that evolved to hunt without it, Vane continued. The only species that learned to fight without it. And that created something in your neural structure that the other species don't have. You don't think through the weapon. You think with it. It becomes an extension of your body in a way that terrifies other species when they finally understand it. One thought about her grandfather, about the countless hours at the range, about the feeling of the rifle becoming part of her rather than just a tool she held. She had always thought that was normal, that everyone who shot felt that way. The idea that it was uniquely human had never occurred to her. The EMP test wasn't random, Vane said. I designed it specifically after I learned a human cadet had enrolled this year. I wanted to see if the rumors about human marksmanship were true. If humans had lost that ability in the generations since joining the galactic community. You were testing me, one said slowly. I was testing whether humanity still remembered how to fight like humans. Vane stood again, walking to the window that looked out over the Academy's training grounds. You passed. Better than I expected, actually. You not only survived, you led. You adapted. You used skills that every other species in that maze had forgotten were possible. He turned back to her. But here's the problem, Cadet Park. The Academy's entire doctrine is built around neural targeting and computational combat systems. It's the galactic standard, and standards are hard to change. If you continue training the standard way, you'll always be mediocre. The implant will always feel wrong to you because you learned to shoot the right way first. The right way, one asked. The human way. Vane returned to his desk and pulled up a holographic display. It showed combat statistics, efficiency ratings, adaptability scores. I'm offering you a choice. Continue with standard training, graduate somewhere in the middle of your class, and serve adequately in whatever position you're assigned. Or embrace what makes you different and become something this academy hasn't seen in years. What would that be? A specialist in dead tech combat. Someone who can fight when all the electronics fail, when the targeting computers go dark, when everyone else is helpless. Vane's mechanical eye gleamed. I can train you properly, not just in marksmanship, but in all the old skills. Fieldcraft, tactical awareness without sensors, combat without computational assistance. But it won't be easy. You'll have to maintain in the standard systems while mastering everything else in your spare time. One thought about the maze, about the feeling of the rifle in her hands, about leading those other cadets to safety using skills none of them understood. She thought about her grandfather's words. Technology fails, but the body remembers. What about my ranking? She asked. I'm on probation. If you accept this training, I'll have your probation lifted. You completed an objective that 85% of the class failed. That counts for something. Vane paused. But I need to know you're committed. This isn't a game, Cadet Park. If we do this, you'll be challenging the entire galactic military doctrine. You'll be proving that the old ways still matter. Some people won't like that. One stood up. She thought about's panic in the maze, about's helplessness, about 200 cadets who couldn't function without their implants. She thought about her grandfather hitting targets at 500 meters with shaking hands and no computer assistance. Teach me, she said. A smile crossed Vane's augmented face, the first real expression one had seen from him. Good. Your real training begins tomorrow morning at 0500. Bring that rifle of your grandfather's. You're going to need it. Yes, sir. And one, Vane called as she turned to leave. Keep the rifle close from now on. Don't hide it under your bunk. Wear it, maintain it, make it part of you. You're going to teach this academy something it's forgotten. You can't do that if you're ashamed of where you come from. One returned to her room in a daze. Was there, studying on her data pad. She looked up when one entered. Are you in trouble? Asked, concern in her voice. Everyone's been talking about what happened in the maze. No, one said slowly. I don't think I'm in trouble at all. She pulled her grandfather's rifle from under the bunk and began cleaning it, right there in the middle of the room where could see. The other cadet watched with her 4 eyes wide. "That's what you used in the maze, isn't it?" asked. "That old weapon." "Yes," one said, running a cloth along the barrel, "and I'm going to keep using it." "But why? The modern weapons are so much better." One looked at her roommate and smiled. "They're better when they work, but when they don't, this rifle is all that stands between you and whatever wants to kill you. I think today proved that." Was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You saved my life in there. When the power went out, I didn't know what to do. I've never felt so helpless." "You're not helpless," one said. "You just rely too much on the technology. If it was gone for good, you'd learn to adapt. All of you would." "Could you teach me," asked suddenly, "how to shoot without the implant?" One looked at her roommate's earnest expression and thought about Vane's words. "You'll be proving that the old ways still matter." Maybe that included sharing those ways with others. "Maybe," one said. "Let me talk to Instructor Vane first. But yes, I think I could teach you." That night, one lay in her bunk with her grandfather's rifle beside her instead of hidden beneath her. Outside, the 3 suns set in sequence, painting the academy in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the complex, instructors prepared tomorrow's standard lessons. Somewhere, cadets studied their neural targeting systems and energy weapon specifications. But in one small room, a human cadet cleaned an ancient rifle and thought about the future. A future where the old ways and the new ways might finally learn to coexist. A future where being human was an advantage, not a limitation. Tomorrow, her real training would begin. Tomorrow, she would learn to be what her grandfather always knew she could be. A warrior in the old tradition, adapted for a new age. One smiled in the darkness and closed her eyes. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt like she belonged. 3 months passed like a storm. One barely remembered sleeping. Every morning at 0500, she met Instructor Vane at the old auxiliary range. While the other cadets were still in their bunks, she practiced with kinetic weapons until her shoulders ached and her hands cramped. Vane pushed her harder than any instructor she'd ever known. "Again," he would say when she missed a moving target by centimeters. "A centimeter miss in training is a death in combat." But the training wasn't just shooting. Vane taught her to read terrain without sensors, to predict enemy movement without tracking computers, to navigate by stars instead of satellite positioning. He taught her how soldiers fought before technology made warfare convenient. "The implant makes you fast," Vane explained during one session, "but it makes you dependent. I'm teaching you to be slower but unstoppable." During regular training hours, one maintained her with standard equipment. Her scores with neural targeting improved to respectable levels, good enough to stay off probation but not exceptional. She didn't care. At night, she outshot everyone in the academy with weapons they considered obsolete. Word spread through the cadet corps. The human who could fight in the dark. Some cadets avoided her, uneasy with skills they didn't understand. Others, asked questions and watched when one practiced in the auxiliary range. Stopped mocking her entirely, though he watched her during training exercises with an expression that might have been respect or might have been fear. Now, standing at the entrance to the final crucible, one felt ready. This was the ultimate test, the week-long combat assessment that would determine their final rankings and military assignments. 200 cadets would enter the simulated battlefield on the Academy's moon. Only the best would leave with the assignments they wanted. The briefing was simple. Survive. Complete objectives. Earn points through tactical success and combat efficiency. The simulation would run for 7 days in a hostile environment with limited supplies and constant threats. One more thing. Instructor Vane announced to the assembled cadets. On day 3, at exactly 1200 hours, an electromagnetic pulse will sweep the entire battlefield. All electronic systems will fail for the remainder of the assessment. Plan accordingly. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Another EMP. After what happened in the maze, the instructors were doing it again. One caught Vane's mechanical eye across the room. He gave the slightest nod. This was her moment. Everything they'd trained for led to this. The first 2 days of the Crucible went as expected. Cadets formed squads, claimed territory, engaged in tactical combat using standard equipment. One stayed with a small group including and 2 other cadets she'd trained with. She performed adequately with her pulse rifle and neural targeting, staying in the middle of the rankings. Led one of the dominant squads, his team coordinating with devastating precision. They held the northern sector and had completed 3 major objectives. The scoreboard showed him in second place, just behind a squad leader named. On the evening of day 2, one sat with her squad around a small camp. The moon's surface was rocky and cold, the simulation making everything feel uncomfortably real. Her checked their equipment, making sure everything was charged for the next day. "Tomorrow's the EMP," said quietly, her 4 hands busy maintaining her pulse rifle. "Are you ready?" One patted the kinetic rifle slung across her back. She'd been carrying it alongside her standard equipment from the beginning, claiming it was for emergencies. Now her understood it was much more than that. "I'm ready," one said. "The question is whether everyone else is." Day 3 arrived cold and clear. At 11:55, one found a defensible position on high ground and waited. Her huddled nearby, nervous despite knowing what was coming. At exactly 1200 hours, the world went dark. Every neural implant shut down simultaneously. Every energy weapon died. Shields collapsed. Communication networks vanished. 200 cadets suddenly found themselves alone in their own heads, holding useless equipment, vulnerable to an enemy that was still very much active. The simulation's combat drones, running on shielded systems, continued their patrols. The objectives remained in place. The test went on, but now it was a test of adaptation rather than technology. One unslung her grandfather's rifle and loaded it with smooth, practiced movements. Around the battlefield she could hear shouting, confusion, panic. It was the maze all over again, but bigger, much bigger. "What do we do?" one of her asked, staring at his dead pulse rifle. "We adapt," one said. "Follow me, stay quiet, move when I move." She led them down the hillside, using natural cover and terrain features to stay hidden. No sensors to detect them, no tracking systems to give away their position. Just eyes and careful movement. They encountered a group of 4 cadets huddled behind rocks, completely exposed to anyone with working weapons. It was from another squad. "Our equipment is dead. The drones are hunting us." "I know," one said. "Come with us, stay low and don't make noise." By the end of day 3, one had gathered 17 cadets. They moved as a unit, with one using her kinetic weapons to eliminate drones and secure positions. She taught them basic fieldcraft as they went, showing them how to move without relying on motion sensors or thermal imaging. Proved to be a quick learner. One gave her one of the auxiliary ballistic pistols from the emergency cache she'd located, and after some basic instruction, could hit targets at 20 meters. Not perfect, but good enough to be useful. The objectives became achievable again. While other squads remained paralyzed or scattered, one's group moved with purpose. They secured supply caches, held defensive positions, and completed objectives that required actual combat rather than just technological superiority. On day 5, they encountered Squad. Thee and his team were pinned down in a canyon, surrounded by combat drones. Without their weapons, they were trapped. One could hear shouting orders, but his squad was helpless. "We should leave them," one of one's cadets suggested. "They're competition." One looked at the trapped squad, then at the drones circling like predators. She thought about her grandfather's stories, about soldiers who never left anyone behind regardless of competition or rivalry. "No," she said, "we're all cadets here, we help each other." She positioned her shooters on the canyon rim and coordinated a simultaneous assault. 17 shooters with kinetic weapons firing in disciplined volleys. The drones never stood a chance. Within 2 minutes, the canyon was clear. Climbed up to where one stood. His large black eyes studied her for a long moment. "You saved us." "Yes," one said simply. "Why? We're competing for rankings." "Because that's what soldiers do," one replied. "My grandfather taught me that too. We can compete when everyone has a fair chance. Right now you needed help." Nodded slowly. "Can you teach us what you know?" By day 6, one was leading a force of over 40 cadets. She distributed all the kinetic weapons she could find and taught basic marksmanship to anyone willing to learn. They weren't expert marksmen, but they could hit targets at close range, which was infinitely better than being helpless. The final objective appeared on day 7, a fortified position at the center of the battlefield, defended by the simulation's most advanced drones and worth enough points to determine the final rankings. Under normal circumstances, it would require coordinated energy weapon assaults and shield penetration tactics. One studied the position from a distance. The drones were positioned perfectly, overlapping fields of fire, no obvious weaknesses. A frontal assault would fail. Even with kinetic weapons, they didn't have enough firepower to simply overwhelm the defenses. "What's the plan?" asked. One smiled. "We're going to fight like humans fought before drones existed, before sensors told us where the enemy was. We're going to use the one advantage we have." "What advantage?" "They're machines. They follow patterns, but we can be unpredictable." She split her force into 5 groups. 3 would create diversions from different angles, using noise and movement to draw the drone's attention. The remaining 2 groups, led by one, would approach from the flanks during the chaos. "You want me to lead an assault?" asked, surprised. "I want you to help me win," one replied, handing him one of the better kinetic rifles. "Can you do that?" Took the weapon, hefted it, and nodded. "Teach me what I need to know." The assault began at dawn on the 7th day. The diversion teams made noise, threw rocks, created the appearance of attacks from 3 different directions. The drones responded exactly as predicted, shifting to meet the perceived threats. One and led their teams in from the sides, moving quietly, using terrain and patience. When they were in position, one gave the signal. 40 rifles fired in disciplined volleys, eliminating drones with concentrated firepower rather than advanced technology. It wasn't clean or efficient by galactic standards. They used more ammunition than any modern military would approve. But it worked. The position fell, and one's combined force secured the objective. The simulation ended exactly at the 7-day mark. Systems came back online, flooding everyone with reconnected implants and active weapons. The scoreboard updated for the final time. One had jumped from probationary status to 8th place overall. More importantly, Every cadet in the top 20 had been part of her force at some point during the assessment. She had taught them, led them, and brought them through when their technology failed. At the graduation ceremony, 200 cadets stood in formation. One wore her dress uniform with her grandfather's rifle slung across her back, a special accommodation granted by Instructor Vane. The other cadets no longer looked at it as a primitive relic. They looked at it as the weapon that had saved them. Leaned close and whispered, "You weren't struggling with the implants at all, were you? You were fighting yourself, fighting against becoming dependent on technology you knew could fail." "Maybe," one admitted, "or maybe I was just trying to hold onto something that made me human." Approached after the ceremony, his formal salute was crisp and respectful. "I underestimated your species, Cadet Park. I won't make that mistake again." "We all have things to learn from each other," one replied. "That's the point of being here." The final moment came when Instructor Vane called one to the front of the assembly. His mechanical eye gleamed in the ceremony lights as he presented her with a specialist designation and instructor's badge. "Cadet 1 Park," Vane announced, his voice carrying across the hall. "Graduated with honors, assigned specialty, kinetic combat instruction." He paused, looking out at all the assembled cadets and instructors. This human reminded us of something we had forgotten. When all your technology fails, when the lights go out and the computers die, you had better hope you have someone who knows how to fight without them. Vane turned back to one, speaking more quietly but still audible to the front rows. "Your grandfather would be proud." One felt tears threatening but held them back. She thought of the old man at the mountain range, teaching her to shoot with patience and wisdom. He had given her more than marksmanship skills. He had given her an identity that could survive in any era, with any technology or without it. As the ceremony concluded and cadets began to disperse to their new assignments, one stood looking out over the academy grounds. Tomorrow she would begin teaching her first class. Tomorrow she would start sharing the old knowledge with a new generation. The galaxy had advanced beyond Earth's primitive warfare. They had neural implants and energy weapons and computational targeting that made every shot perfect. But they had also forgotten that perfection was fragile, that technology could fail, that sometimes the oldest methods were the most reliable. 1 Park, human from Earth's Sol colony, granddaughter of an infantry soldier from forgotten wars, was going to teach them how to be warriors the old way, the human way. And the galaxy would be better for it.